Life Audio.
Hello. Thank you for listening to Your Daily Bible Verse, the podcast that examines one verse each day to learn more about God and His will for our lives. I'm your host, Kyle Norman. After a brief message from one of our sponsors, we will dive into today's Bible verse.
Finding uplifting news in today's headlines is often like searching for a needle in a haystack. At the Story Behind podcast, we believe in the power of finding heartwarming tales and are happy to share empowering stories with you every week. Get inspired by the note a waitress received from a patron dining alone, and even hear about how one VIP passenger made a hardworking pilot get emotional before his flight. To start listening to the Story Behind podcast, visit lifeaudio.com.
I knew you'd love this place. What was that?
A selfie.
You just took a selfie.
With my new Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 5, I can snap selfies while it's folded shut and use the best camera on the phone. It's so small, I can put it right back in my front pocket. Now it's in my pocket. Now it's taking selfies.
Whoa!
And the huge cover screen lets us see our pics without opening it. Aw, you look cute confused.
I do look cute confused.
Get your Galaxy Z Flip 5 now at the Samsung Experience Store at Roosevelt Field.
We all struggle in our faith from time to time. Psalm 23 speaks of the valley of darkness, and ancient writers often refer to the dark night of the soul. Life zigs when we want it to zag, and despite our best efforts, we sometimes struggle in our faith. But just because we feel spiritually discouraged, it doesn't mean that God has abandoned us, or that we are somehow failing in our life with God. If you need to be encouraged in your spiritual walk, I invite you to join me at revkylenorman.ca and be reminded of the grace, hope, and love that we have in Christ Jesus. Today's Bible verse is Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. I feel like the church is destroying my faith. This is what a parishioner said to me in one of the first churches that I pastored. They had just joined the church not too long ago, having gone through a dramatic conversion experience, the kind of conversion experience that everybody hopes to witness. They move from a life of darkness and negativity, guilt and shame, to one of love and life and joy and faith. They were on fire for God. They were passionate about the church. They attended every service. They participated in all the ministries, and they built around them a group of church family and friends who encouraged them and supported them in their new faith. But after about 6 months, they came to me and described how they were struggling. Because what they began to realize was that even in the church, there were fights and disagreements and arguments. That despite our lofty ideals, our dreams, and our best intentions for the church, sometimes the church didn't behave as if it should. The community of faith can be messy. What do we do when we find ourselves in conflict or disagreement? How do we go forward? How do we respond to a brother or sister who has sinned against us, one who sits just across the aisle every Sunday? Well, Jesus has some words for us. But it's more than just putting forward a divine conflict management strategy. Jesus speaks to the heart of what it means to be a community. Jesus says, if a member of the church sins against you, go and tell it to them. And it can sound like Jesus is giving allowance for us to air our grievances to one another. If somebody sins against us, well, then you should feel free to rebuke them, right? Tell them they are wrong and you are right. Oh, happy day. Who amongst us hasn't wanted to give someone a piece of our mind? Sadly, this is how the verse is sometimes used. But if that's what Jesus means, well, then notice how everything goes from bad to worse. Because if you know the rest of the passage, you know the next two phases in Jesus' plan. If the person doesn't listen to you or respond the way you want, well, then bring backup. Get 2 or 3 more people to really solidify your point and establish that you are right and they are wrong. And if they still don't listen, well, tell it to the church, inform the community, send an email, tell the local gossip, tell the pastor, make sure everybody knows who is righteous and who is not. Do we really think that this is what Jesus means? Is anybody worried about the subtle degrading of the law of love? Is this really the community that Jesus is encouraging? It seems ripe for manipulation and betrays Christ's call to love one another. I think it's very important that we see what Jesus is doing here, because he does what he always does, that he turns the discussion on its head. Because that issue at hand is not the annoyances and disagreements that we find ourselves in. What Jesus is addressing is how we respond to one who lives in an impaired relationship with the community. This isn't about you versus me. At its heart, Jesus is asking the disciples to be so ruthlessly devoted to each other that they will be concerned when someone isn't experiencing the full grace and love of Jesus. And yes, it begins with a private discussion, but it is a discussion rooted in love and grace. The discussion to be had is to be an invitation to renewed life and fellowship. Ask yourself this question. If there was a behavior, an attitude, or an action that was blocking you from fully experiencing God's grace and mercy, wouldn't you want someone to point that out? I know I would. That's what it means to be a community. To be a community of people is to allow ourselves to be loved by another. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that there aren't any boundaries. It doesn't mean that anything goes. No. Jesus sets the parameters of what it means to follow him, what is appropriate behavior and not appropriate behavior. But these instructions are about how to maintain a relationship with each other, one which is rooted in Christ's loving presence. Because the spiritual plan that Jesus has for us is to be a community of faith. And it is as a community that we experience the presence and power of Jesus. When we dare to believe that Jesus unites us to the very person that we are in conflict with, then we open ourselves to miracles and resurrections and renewal. An authentic community of faith isn't one that avoids disagreements. Now, I really hope that nobody feels like the church is destroying their faith. If you do, please speak to someone. But communities aren't perfect. Communities are messy. And we all need to put our energy into working with each other in a radical expression of love. And we all need to put our energy into walking towards each other with ceaseless forgiveness. And the more that we do that for the people in our church, and the more that they do that for us, well, then the entire church becomes edified and blessed.
Your Daily Bible Verse is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review this podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.
Jeep Adventure Days is going on now. Hurry in for great deals on a great selection of Jeep brand vehicles. Well-qualified lessees get a low mileage lease on the 2024 Jeep Wrangler Willys 4xE for $369 a month for 24 months with $3,449 to its signing. Tax, title, license extra. No security deposit required. Call 1-888-925-JEEP for details. Requires dealer contribution and lease through Stellantis Financial. Extra charge for miles over 20,000. Includes 7,500 EV cap cost reduction. Not all customers will qualify. Residency restrictions apply. Take delivery by 9/25. Jeep is a registered trademark.